Welcome everyone to the second round of the Tepe Sigeman Co tournament in Malmo, Sweden. On your screen is the Sweden number one, Nils Grandelius, and he takes on the Norway number one, or rather the world number one, Magnus Carlsen. It's going to be very exciting because Magnus did start off with a draw in round number one against Arjun Erigaisi, and we have the guest making the first move, pawn to e4. Handshake with both the players as we get ready for the battle. Magnus Carlsen and Nils Grandelius. It's going to be very exciting because Nils is a fighter. No matter who his opponent is, he always plays for a win. He opens the game with pawn to d4, and Magnus Carlsen's choice is going to be very important here because he could very well play pawn to d5. He likes to play the queen's gambit declined. But first, you adjust all the pieces. He puts all the pieces together. And Magnus is playing a classical tournament after a very, very long time. You know, his last tournament was Norway chess. Knight comes out to f6. And Nils now plays pawn to c4. And will Magnus go g6 to play for a win? Well, he goes pawn to e6. The more solid option to open up the bishop to come to b4. And now knight to c3, allowing the Nimzo Indian, which is already a step in the exciting direction, I would say. And Magnus pushes his pawn to c5. Wow, and you could see the bar rising up slightly. That's because Magnus has taken a risk. He's gone for the Benoni defense. Generally, you go with a different move order, like you go with c5, d5, e6, knight c3, but it's the same position now. d5 played, Magnus takes on d5, c takes d5. And why is the Benoni so dangerous for black? Because strategically, taking huge risks, this is a weak pawn and giving white a very big center. But Magnus recognizes that Nils maybe is not a hardcore 1d4 player. Maybe he's not super well prepped in this. Maybe he doesn't understand these positions so well. And so he's ready to take this risk. g6 played. Now, one of the main lines here is f4. It's called the 4-pawn attack, or just very dangerous. But Nils goes for slightly more conservative approach. He brings his bishop out to e2. Okay, you put your bishop on this beautiful long diagonal. This is the Benoni bishop here on g7. You also call it the dragon bishop in the dragon variation. And now bishop comes to e3. So you controlled the g4 square and you bring your bishop out to e3. And Magnus very likely will castle here. And he does. Short castles on the board. Maybe there was a better move here to start with a6. But okay, castle seems very fair. Nils brings his knight to f3. And now if Magnus tries to hassle the bishop simply moves to g5. So he goes bishop g4. And the idea is to do away with this bishop, bring your knight to d7, and because black has less space, you are kind of trading pieces. And you're ready to give up your bishop pair. Grandelius doesn't want Magnus to take his knight and finds the best move here, knight d2, a good move, so that if bishop takes, queen takes, the knight is ready to go to c4. Bishop takes on e2. Queen takes on e2. So knight c4, bishop f4, you can pop out the knight, bishop, and start attacking the d6 pawn. These are some of the ideas. Magnus first brings his knight to d7, completes his development, connects the rook slowly. Rook e8 could be an idea. And now short castles. This is where it's important to decide how you're going to progress, because a normal move is rook e8, but after something like queen d3 or maybe even just simple move, there was no easy way to move ahead. So Magnus goes knight e8, and this is what Magnus is doing very interestingly well. See, the knight now frees up the f pawn, and f4 played by Grandelius. Maybe another move was bishop f4 to keep pressure here. a4 is a standard move, but f4 says, well, I'm coming at you. And Magnus, even without much thought, just pushes f5, stops these pawns. And what is very important to notice is that this weakens the e6 square, but the knight on e8 will control it via c7. So Magnus understands this position very well. E takes f5, and now not rook takes f5. That would be a terrible move, because after knight d e4, white is clearly better. But g takes f5. You take an isolated pawn, but you control the e4 square. You control the most important squares in the position. Bishop goes back to f2. The bishop could at some point pop out from h4. Queen e6 becomes a reality. Knight c7, as we spoke, the e6 square is now controlled. But also, you have b5 on the card, so a4 seems logical. Knight to f3, maybe a step in the wrong direction. Knight f3, he's going to g5, coming in to e6, but knight f6 now, attacking d5 twice. Okay, the pawn is not really hanging, because after take, and take, queen c4 simply drops the piece. So queen d3 played by Nils, attacking f5. I mean, logical move is to defend it, but Magnus plays a beautiful move, b5. I'm a big fan of this move, because knight b5, now not the d5 pawn hanging, because it isn't right now. I mean, you could take potentially knight c d5, but then f5 is hanging. But the point is, knight takes b5, queen takes b5, no knight d5, queen c4 wins the game. So here, rook b8 is a very fine move. And you can see how Magnus has turned the position around. Rook b8 attacks the queen. Look at the time on the clock. Nils has 29 minutes. Magnus has 53. He comes back queen d3. And his point is, if you take on b2, I'm ready to take on f5. But Magnus is not going to take on b2. He's in fact going to come in with the knight. Yes, knight to e4. Now the bishop opens up. The rook is here. The knight can take the bishop if it wants at some point. Black has super compensation. Rook b1 played to defend the pawn. And now, okay, you can cash out. But why do cash out when you can actually go queen a5? He plays it. Amazing chess by Magnus, attacking the a2 pawn. And then if you play a3, now you can take on b2. And then the a3 pawn is also weak. So knight g5. Nils going for the attack here. He's like, okay, I want to dislodge this monstrous knight. Queen d2. What a move. So if you take the queen, knight d2 and a fork. And you can't take here, the queen is hanging. So he takes the queen and goes to h3, trying to threaten checkmate in one move. But now knight takes knight. He trades, e takes f5, and boom, rook takes b2. Seems like a fair move to make. And the material would be equalized after rook takes b2. Magnus thinking and takes it. Rook takes b2. And the material is not just equal. Look at this c pawn, all ready to run down the board. Takes on b2. Queen takes. Now the a2 pawn is a bit weak. d5 is weak. Oh my god. The position looks dangerous, and Nils goes queen h5. Well, he could have tried to defend with queen b3, but that's not Nils' style. He wants to try and figure out some way to create some pressure. He goes queen h5. Magnus says, thank you for another pawn. Takes it. Queen takes a2. And I guess the only way to justify the last move is to go g6. He plays it. And now after h6, which is kind of a must to keep the position closed, which Magnus plays. The question is, Can you do bishop e3 to put pressure here? I guess the problem is queen d5, bishop h6, check, king h1 and queen g4, and you have to trade queens. So that's the reason why queen f3 is played. And now Magnus like, I have the a pawn, I have the control on the queening square. All I have to do is a5, a4, a3, push the pawn forward, h4 played. I wonder what white's doing here exactly. Like, what is your idea? I mean, there's no threat. Push the pawn. And Magnus, not one to be afraid of any ghosts, pushes the pawn to a4. Nils brings his queen to f4, attacking d6. And now look at Magnus's time on the clock. He has 27 minutes. And this is world-class play. Because now is the time to calculate. You have to calculate a3, queen d6, queen moves, bishop c5, and Magnus takes 15 minutes. Full 15 minutes to work it all out. That's why he's the world number one. It's not an accident. He knows when to think. He knows when to put in the effort. Queen d6. And now this beautiful move, queen b2, which Magnus has most likely seen, I believe. Yes, he has. Queen b2. Beautiful. Bishop takes c5, attacking the a3 pawn, and maybe putting pressure on the rook. But okay, you don't sacrifice your queen, but there's a threat, queen e6. And many would get a bit afraid at this point, but not Magnus. He realizes that this would be the fastest way to win. a2, he pushes the pawn, and now queen e6 check has to be explored. Yes, king h8. And the point which you have to note here is that he plays it, if bishop f8, there's a check. Very important. If you block with the rook, I queen with a check. If you go to the h file, I give you another check, and then I bring my bishop. You have to block with your rook, and then queens. So that's the reason why he goes king h2. But now there are many ways to win here. And the easiest is what Magnus finds, queen e5 check. Because with this, he's actually trading off the queens and he doesn't have to try any harder here. Queen takes e5. And you know, Magnus's win is like the perfect advertisement here for the Benoni. Because usually it's this bishop which you put your trust in, the queen side majority which you have, you put your trust in. And here's the pawn that has reached all the way. By the way, don't queen it, because after taking you lose your rook here. So Magnus quietly moves his rook and now threatening a1. There's just no way to stop the pawn from queening. And Magnus wins. Nils resigns with a smile on his face. I believe an excellent game played by Magnus Carlsen. I think a fantastic chess by the world number one, showing what amazing understanding he had. I was absolutely in love with few moves that he played in the opening. Firstly, it started with the move knight e8, very nice. Then the move f5, and then taking back with the pawn, g takes f5. And after that, this move b5, which came as maybe a small surprise to Nils. Once that happened, I believe that black had huge compensation. And then queen a5. It seems like Magnus played like an engine, not putting a foot wrong anywhere. And that just goes to show that Magnus, how strong he is in classical chess. Now, in round 3, Magnus will take on the man in form, Nodirbek Abdusattorov, and we are all excited for that clash.